In the last video, we learned about predefined functions and how each variable created is an object of the defined type, as well as learned about primitive data types. Today, we'll learn about control structures or if and else statements and combine everything we know to be able to build a calculator console application in C++. If and else statements are also called control structure because they determine the flow of the program. Let's see how. So let's say I'll create a boolean variable called is raining, and this is raining variable will store the value of true. Now I want to be able to print the following message, get umbrella, but I want to print this when this variable is true, so when it is raining. So how to do this? This is where we will use the if statement. So I'll say if is raining, so is raining, and make sure I open and close parentheses, or excuse me, curly brackets, because the if statement is a block. It contains block of code that will be executed when this condition evaluates true. Let me say it again. So when this expression or condition right here gives true, this block of code or whatever is under the if will be executed. So here we are saying if is raining. Let's go up here and see what is the value that if is raining stores. So it is true. So here we are saying if true, if the condition is true, print the following block of, or print the following message. So the if block will only be executed if the condition right here is true, right? So let's go ahead and try it. We get a value right here which is get umbrella. So that's because is raining is true, so it's like saying if true, and if the condition is true, the following block of code will be executed. Now, what if the condition is false? What will happen? Well, nothing will be executed. The if block won't be executed, as you can see right here. Nothing was printed on the console. That's because we said right here if false, because is raining stores false. That means we are saying if false, and that means the condition is not true, so it won't work. So what will happen here is that cout won't work right here, and the code will terminate. But I want to be able to handle this situation. I want to be able to print cout don't get umbrella, because is raining is false, right? So that means it's not raining. So I want to be able to print cout don't get umbrella. Okay? So how to do this? Well, if I leave it like this, it will be printed anyway. But if I go ahead and say true right here, watch what will happen. So let me say true. We know right now that the if block will work, right? So as you can see, get umbrella and also don't get umbrella was printed. Now they are on the same line because we didn't put end L. But that's okay. What I want to tell you here is that the don't get umbrella was also executed. And that's wrong. We don't want that to happen. So what we will do here is we will use an else block. So I'll say else, and it is also a block, but it doesn't contain any condition. So the else block doesn't contain any condition like the if statement. So you don't put parentheses right here and mention conditions inside. The else block will only be executed if the above condition evaluates false. So right here, let me go ahead and replace this with false, okay? So I'll say false, and let me close this. So I will say something like, first of all, compile. As you can see, don't get umbrella. So what happens here is that the compiler starts with the if block. It says right here, if is raining. Is raining is false, so the condition doesn't work. What will happen is that the compiler will jump to the else statement, and the else statement will be executed anyway because all the above conditions evaluated false. So that is why we will get this output. Now what if I have another variable called bool and is sunny, for example. So I'll say something like true, okay? So I want to create a scenario where if it is raining, I will get an umbrella. Otherwise, if it is sunny, I want to get a hat. But if it's not sunny or it's not raining, I won't get anything. How to do this? Well, I could do this using else if. So else if requires a condition, and you have to give it a condition. It's like the if statement, but it comes after the if statement, and you can have multiple else if blocks stacked upon each other, but you can only have one if and one else. As you can see right here, I can go on and on creating else if conditions, but I could only have one if and one else. Okay? So let me go ahead and delete this one because we don't need it. And now let's create an else if statement. So else if is sunny, right? So what I want to print here is cout get a hat, okay? So let's go ahead and do it by ourselves. So if it is raining, false, so it's not raining, this condition evaluates false. Else if, so otherwise if it is sunny, true, it is sunny, so we will print get hat. And the program will stop, the execution will terminate. Let's go ahead and run it. So I'll say, first of all, compile, then run. As you can see, get a hat. That's because it is sunny and we should get a hat. Now, if it was false, look what will happen now. What do you think will be executed? Definitely the else block. That's because all the above conditions evaluated false. Look, if is raining, it is false, so nothing will happen. Else if is sunny is also false, that means nothing will happen. We will jump to the else statement and it will be executed automatically. That's because all the above conditions evaluated false. Again, I will run it to make sure. And we got don't get an umbrella. Well, I should change the message to don't get anything, but it's alright. The important thing is that we get the idea of if, and else, okay? Now let's use real conditions. Let's say I will have, instead of Boolean variables, I will say int num1 equal to 12, int num1 equal to 24, okay? Now I want to compare, first of all, look what I'm going to do. First of all, I want to compare if num1 is greater than num2. I also want to check if num2 is greater than num1, as well as I want to check if, for example, num1 is an even number. So I would say is even, and like this, I'm going to check if num1 is greater than 10. Okay, just a simple scenario, and I opened black box by accident. Okay, so greater than 10. Okay, otherwise, if all of the above conditions evaluate false, I want to print a simple message like all conditions evaluated false. Okay, so this is what we're going to do now. Let's go ahead and do it. The first condition is to check if num1 is greater than num2. How to do this? So I'll say if, and inside the parentheses I mentioned that we need to mention a condition. So if I say num1 greater than num2, this is an expression that returns either true or false. And we saw this operator, it is the relational operator, the greater than sign, that compares if a number is greater than the other number. So here we are checking if num1 is greater than num2. Well, is num1 greater than num2? No. So what we'll get here is false. And that's because num1 is not greater than num2. So what will happen is that when we use expressions inside if blocks, we will get either true or false. So if num1 greater than num2, what I want to do is say cout num1 and num1 greater than num2. Okay? However, I still have other conditions. I want to check if num2 is greater than num1. I wrote num2 right here. Okay, so that's why I'll use an else if, because I have more conditions to check. So I'll say else if num2 greater than num1. So what will happen here is I'll say cout num1 num2 greater than num1, right? So there it is. Okay, I still have another condition. I want to check if num1 is even, but as well as I want to check if num1 is greater than 10. So I have both expressions, or comparisons, that I need to check at the same time. Let's go ahead first of all and write the else if, because we have more conditions. Now, how to check if a number is even? Well, check if a number is even, we should divide it by 2, and if the remainder of this division is 0, then the number is even. So how to do this? So I'll say num1, and using the modulus operator and mention 2, this will divide num1 by 2 and will return the remainder. So I will check if num1 modulus 2 is equal to 0. So if the remainder of this division is 0, that means the number is even. But I also want to check if num1 is greater than 10. And this is a great example for us to use the logical operator called AND. We saw this in this video, so make sure to check it out if you need some refreshing. So like this, I will say AND num1 greater than 10. So this expression, so this condition here will only work if both expressions evaluate true. And this is what I want. I want to check if num1 is even as well as greater than 10. That's why I need to use AND. I need both conditions to evaluate true. If one condition evaluates false, that means this expression will evaluate false and the condition won't work. Okay? So I'll say right here, cout num1 is even and greater than 10. Okay? Great. Now we checked, we did all of these three conditions. Else I'll say something like this, and I'll use this phrase right here. I'll say cout like this, and so we use the else block because none of the conditions above evaluated true. Let's see right now, let's run our code and see what will happen. Like this, and go. As you can see, we get 24 greater than 12. Now you might ask why we didn't go to this condition right here. Well, we look at it and we say num1 modulus 2 equal to 0. Well, 12 is a even number as well as greater than 10. So why didn't this condition was executed? Well, that's because once a condition evaluated true, that means what happened in our output is that we got 24 greater than 12. So num2 greater than 1, this condition evaluated true. So once a condition evaluates true, what will happen is that the program will stop executing the other conditions because this condition evaluated true, so whatever comes after it will be executed and the program will continue normally. So once a condition evaluates true, the rest won't be evaluated anymore. Okay? So now let's say something like, I don't know, 11. So now the first condition should evaluate true, num1 greater than num2. As you can see, 12 greater than 11. Let's say num2 is equal to num1. The third condition should evaluate true. Let's see. So I'll do this and execute. As you can see, 12 is even and greater than 10. Well, that's because num1 is even, this condition evaluated true, and this condition evaluated true. That means all the condition evaluated true, and this else if block was executed. Now what if I go ahead and say something like 5 right here and 5 right here? The else block should be executed. So let's see. As you can see, all conditions evaluated false. So when all conditions evaluate false, the else block will be executed. Now with the knowledge we have, let's go ahead and build a calculator program. Okay, so let's go ahead and create two numbers. First of all, I'll create them as doubles and I'll call them num1 and num2. I want to allow the user to be able to input integer values as well as doubles, like decimal values. Okay, so let's go ahead and right now create another variable called char, and this will store the operator. So I'll call it op. Okay, now those two variables will store the input of the user. So that's why I'll go ahead and ask the user to give us input. So I'll first of all say cout input num1. Then I will use cin to receive the input and store it inside num1. Then I will ask input an operator like plus, minus, divide, So when the user inputs this, I'll use cin to handle this input and store it inside op. So why did I use char? Because simply plus like this can be stored inside a char. Now you can use string, no problem, but still char is a good idea. So I'll go ahead now and say cout input the last number, which is num2. So input num2 like this and say cin num2. Okay, so I'm receiving num2 and storing it inside the variable called num2. So this is simple input output. So I'm receiving input from the user and storing them inside our variables. Now I want to check first of all if the user what the user wants. So maybe the user wants to add those two numbers. How to do this? So what I'll do here is say if op equal to plus. That means I'm checking if the user wants to add those two numbers. What I will do here is say num1 plus, I'm displaying only num2 equal to, and I'll say num1 plus num2. So because the user requested to add those two numbers, because I compared our variable that stores the input of the user with this char right here, which is a plus sign. So if they are equal, that means the user wants to add, the condition evaluates true, and the following block of code will be executed. Else if, because maybe the user didn't input a plus. So I'll say op equal to, let's say, minus. Well, if the user wants to subtract those two numbers, I need to be able to handle this and subtract those two numbers. So I'll say num1 minus num2 equal to, where it is, okay, equal to something like num1 minus minus num2. Okay? Also, we still have another condition. I'll say else if the user mentioned, for example, op equal to an asterisk sign. That means the user wants to multiply. So let me go ahead and copy this. Copy this right here and just fix the display. So here, instead of hyphen, I'll say asterisk sign for multiplication, and that's it. So, however, we still have a last condition. So else if op, maybe the user wants to divide. So else if op equal to a front slash, that means the user wants to divide. But there is something here I want to show you. What if the user inputted as denominator 0? You know we can't divide a number by 0. So let's say I said 10 divided by 0. You'll get an error, right? And we want to be able to handle this. I want to check if the number or the denominator, which is going to be num2, of course, if it is 0, then I want to print a message. So that's why I will here use something called nested if statements. That means, well, nested if statements means simply that you are putting if statements inside other if statements. So right here I have the else if. I could use another condition inside of this else if. So I could say if num2 is equal to 0. Like this, I'm checking if the denominator given by the user is 0, then I want to be able to print something like 0 division error, okay? Like this, I'll be handling any errors and making sure that the user receives a message telling them that this is a division error, okay? However, maybe num2 is just a normal number, so I'll say else. So else, num2 is normal, I'll say something like, well, I could print this and simply divide those two numbers. So like this, and change the message right here. And that's it. The L calculator actually works fine right now. Let's go ahead and check it out. So I could go ahead and say something like compile first of all, then run. I'll say 12 right here. Let's say plus 13 should give us 25. We got 25. Let's do it again. So 12 minus 13. As you can see, we got minus 1. Let's do multiplication. So 12 multiplied by 13, 156. Now let's try division. First of all, I'll input a normal denominator. Let's say 12 divided by 2. 6. Okay, nothing wrong happened. Let me compile again. 12 divided by 0. As you can see, 0 division error. I need to mention that I forgot to write an else block right here. What if the user didn't mention an operator that we want? Like maybe the user simply mentioned instead a curly bracket. This is an invalid operator. So I'll say something like invalid operator, and now let me show it to you. Let me show you what I mean mostly. So I go ahead, first of all, compile, and then run. As you can see, input num1. Okay, 12. Let's say I input a curly bracket. Okay, 13. Invalid operator. Okay, that's because we compared, or the C++ compiler compared the OP variable to this, and it evaluated false, again to this, false, and false, and false. And because all of the above conditions evaluated false, this else statement will be executed. And this is it about control structures in C++. This is a very important lesson because control structures are very important to know. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to subscribe and follow me in this C++ tutorial series, and if you missed the last lesson, make sure to check it out in the link in the description. Now I invite you to click on one of these end screens that will appear right now, and I hope to see you in the next video.